The rain fell like whispers against the windows of the old brownstone in Brooklyn, each drop a small surrender to gravity, to time, to the inevitable pull of things falling apart. Inside, Eleanor Hayes sat at the kitchen table with her father's bankruptcy papers spread before her like tarot cards predicting a future she couldn't escape. 28 years old, and her life had become a series of difficult choices, but this one felt different. This one felt like selling her soul. "You don't have to do this, Ellie," her father said from the doorway, his voice rough with shame and pneumonia he couldn't afford to treat properly. Marcus Hayes had been a good man, a dreamer who'd built a small textile business with his bare hands, only to watch it crumble when the loans came due and the market shifted. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for my mistakes." Eleanor looked up at him, this man who'd raised her alone after her mother died, who'd worked double shifts to send her to art school, who'd believed in beauty and craftsmanship in a world that only cared about profit margins. "It's not a sacrifice, Dad. It's a choice." She tried to smile, but it felt like paper tearing. Besides, Declan Thorne is just a businessman. It's a practical arrangement. 2 years and your debts are cleared. I can do 2 years. But even as she said it, she wondered if she was lying. Because Declan Thorne wasn't just any businessman. He was the ghost of Wall Street, the billionaire whose name appeared in financial journals but never society pages, the man who built empires and attended no parties, whose face was known but whose life was a locked vault. People said he had no heart. People said he was incapable of feeling anything at all. The wedding was scheduled for the following week. The Plaza Hotel had never felt more like a mausoleum. Eleanor stood in a private suite wearing a dress the color of winter clouds. Declan's assistant had chosen it, along with everything else, and stared at her reflection with the distant curiosity of someone observing a stranger. Her dark hair had been pulled back in an elegant twist. Diamond earrings she'd never seen before hung from her ears like teardrops frozen mid-fall. "You look beautiful," her father whispered, but his eyes were red-rimmed with guilt. The ceremony was small, perfunctory. Declan Thorne stood at the altar in a black suit that probably cost more than her father's last car, his expression carved from marble. He was 42, she'd learned from the brief background check her friend had insisted on running. Divorced once, 7 years ago. No children listed, no scandal, no warmth. Just an empire of real estate, tech investments, and manufacturing companies that stretched from New York to Tokyo. When he looked at her, his eyes were the color of a winter sea, gray-blue and fathomless. He didn't smile when he said his vows. Neither did she. "I do," she said, and felt the words settle over her like snow. The reception lasted exactly 90 minutes. Business associates congratulated Declan with firm handshakes and Eleanor with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. She was a curiosity, she realized, the unknown woman who'd somehow secured the unsecurable bachelor. They wondered what she'd done, what she'd promised. They couldn't imagine it was as simple and brutal as economics. "We leave for Louisiana tomorrow," Declan told her in the car afterward, the first full sentence he'd spoken to her since the ceremony. His voice was low, precise, devoid of emotion. "I have business in New Orleans. You'll accompany me." "Am I allowed to ask why?" Eleanor kept her gaze on the city lights streaming past the window. "No." He opened his laptop, already dismissed from whatever conversation they weren't having. That night, in the penthouse apartment in Tribeca that would now be her home, Eleanor unpacked her small suitcase in a guest room 3 doors down from the master bedroom. Declan hadn't touched her, hadn't tried. The arrangement, his lawyer had explained, was legal and financial, nothing more. She was a wife on paper, a solution to complicated inheritance laws she didn't fully understand. She lay awake listening to the sounds of a stranger's home, the hum of expensive appliances, the distant click of computer keys from Declan's office. the profound silence of wealth insulating itself from the world. And she wondered what kind of man lived like this. What kind of man chose ice over fire, isolation over connection? She wondered if 2 years would change her into someone equally cold. The flight to New Orleans was first class and silent. Declan worked the entire time, his fingers moving across his laptop with the precision of a surgeon. Eleanor read a book she couldn't concentrate on and watched clouds pass beneath them like thoughts she couldn't quite catch. The heat hit her the moment they stepped out of Louis Armstrong International Airport. Thick, humid, alive with the smell of rain and river water and something ancient growing in the soil. Louisiana felt different from New York, older somehow, as if the land itself remembered things people had forgotten. Their driver took them through the city in a black sedan, past the French Quarter's wrought iron balconies and narrow streets, past the Garden District's mansions draped in Spanish moss and history. But they didn't stop in New Orleans proper. Instead, they continued west, out beyond the tourist areas, into the bayou country where the highway narrowed and cypress trees rose from standing water like cathedral pillars. "Where are we going?" Eleanor finally asked. "A property I'm considering acquiring." Declan didn't look up from his phone. It may take several days to finalize. They arrived at sunset at a sprawling plantation-style house that had been converted into a boutique hotel. Columns rose from a wide porch. Live oaks formed a tunnel of green leading to the entrance. It should have been beautiful, but something about it felt weighted, as if the house itself was holding its breath. "Mr. Thorne," the manager greeted them with excessive warmth. "Your usual suite is ready." Eleanor caught the phrase, "your usual suite." How often did Declan come here, and why? That evening she stood on the balcony of their rooms overlooking gardens that glowed in the last light. Declan had disappeared immediately into meetings, leaving her alone with questions and the strange electric feeling of a storm building in the distance. She heard them before she saw them. Children's laughter, bright and clear as bells cutting through the humid air. She leaned over the railing and saw 2 small figures running through the garden below. A boy and a girl, maybe 5 and 7 years old, chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. And then she saw Declan. He emerged from a side path, and the children ran to him with the kind of unself-conscious joy that stopped Eleanor's heart. The boy crashed into Declan's legs. The girl jumped for his arms. And Declan, the man who'd been carved from ice, who'd barely looked at Eleanor since their wedding, transformed. He knelt. He smiled. He pulled both children close with a tenderness so profound it looked like pain. He said something Eleanor couldn't hear, and the little girl touched his face with small hands, and Declan closed his eyes as if that touch was the only real thing in the world. Eleanor gripped the railing, her mind spinning. The background check had said no children. The lawyers had assured her there were no complications. But here, hidden in the Louisiana dusk, were 2 small people who loved Declan Thorne, with the kind of love that couldn't be faked. Who were they? Why were they here? And why had he hidden them from everyone, including the woman he'd just married? She watched until a woman emerged from the same path, tall, beautiful, with dark skin and darker eyes, and called the children inside. The woman spoke to Declan briefly, her hand resting on his arm with familiar concern. Then Declan stood alone in the garden as night fell around him, his shoulders bent under a weight Eleanor was only beginning to understand. When he finally returned to their suite 2 hours later, Eleanor was waiting. "Who are they?" she asked quietly. Declan stopped in the doorway. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "That's not part of our arrangement." "They're children. They called you—" She stopped because she'd seen what the boy had called him, even if she hadn't heard it. "Daddy." "Eleanor," His voice was flat, final. "This doesn't concern you. I'm your wife. You're a contract." He said it without cruelty, just fact. And contracts have boundaries. He walked past her to his own room and closed the door with a soft click that sounded like a vault ceiling. Eleanor stood in the elegant suite with its antique furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows, listening to cicadas sing their ancient songs in the darkness beyond, and felt something shift inside her. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of fierce curiosity mixed with unexpected hurt. Because in that garden, she'd seen Declan Thorne's secret heart. She'd seen him capable of love so complete it transformed his entire being. And suddenly, the cold, closed man she'd married became something far more complicated, a mystery she desperately needed to solve. Eleanor didn't sleep. She lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the Louisiana night, frogs calling from unseen ponds, the whisper of Spanish moss moving in humid air, the distant rumble of thunder that never quite became rain. And she thought about the children's faces illuminated by fireflies, about Declan's transformation, about all the things people hide in the name of protection. By dawn, she'd made a decision. She found Declan in the hotel's dining room, alone at a corner table with coffee and financial reports spread before him like battle plans. He looked up when she approached, his expression already hardening into dismissal. "I want to know," Eleanor said, sitting down without invitation. "Not because I'm entitled to, but because I'm choosing to care." "That would be a mistake." He returned to his papers. "Maybe. Probably." She poured herself coffee from the carafe on the table, her hands steady, despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. "But I've already made my share of mistakes. One more won't kill me." Declan's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he might simply stand and leave. But instead, he set down his pen with careful precision and looked at her with those winter sea eyes that revealed nothing and everything at once. "Their names are Sophie and James," he said finally, his voice low enough that it couldn't carry beyond their table. "They're 6 and 8, and they're the children of someone I failed." Eleanor waited, barely breathing. "Their mother was my assistant 7 years ago. Brilliant, dedicated. He stopped, choosing words like a man navigating a minefield. "We had an affair, brief, foolish. I ended it when I realized I couldn't give her what she deserved. 6 months later, she told me she was pregnant." "With twins," Eleanor said softly. "I offered everything, marriage, support, acknowledgement, but she refused." Declan's fingers tightened around his coffee cup. "She said she didn't want her children growing up with a father who chose them out of obligation rather than love. She moved here, to Louisiana, near her family, and she asked me to stay away." "But you didn't." "No." The single word carried the weight of years. "I couldn't. So we made an arrangement. I support them financially, visit when I can, stay hidden from the world that would devour them with speculation and tabloid cruelty. They know me as their father, but only in private, only here." Eleanor absorbed this, fitting pieces together. "And their mother? Died 2 years ago. Cancer." Declan's voice cracked almost imperceptibly. "Fast, brutal. She made me promise before she died that I'd protect them from the spotlight, from the judgment, from everything that comes with being associated with me. Her sister, the woman you saw last night, cares for them here, and I come whenever I can." The dining room had filled with other guests, but Eleanor barely noticed them. She was seeing Declan differently now, not as a man without feelings, but as someone who loved so deeply he'd chosen exile over exposure, secrecy over connection, protection over acknowledgement. "They don't know about me," she said. It wasn't a question. "No one knows about you except the people who signed the paperwork." Declan met her gaze directly. "That was part of the arrangement, a quiet ceremony. No announcement. In 2 years, an equally quiet divorce. You walk away with your father's debts cleared. I maintain the family trust requirements. Nothing changes, except everything already has. Eleanor leaned forward. Because I know now, and I'm not going to pretend I don't. Eleanor, I'm not asking to be part of their lives. I'm not demanding anything. She surprised herself with the steadiness in her voice. But I'm not going to participate in the fiction that you're heartless, not anymore. Declan stared at her as if she were a puzzle whose pieces didn't fit any pattern he recognized. Thunder rumbled closer now, and the first drops of rain began to patter against the windows, gentle at first, then building to something more insistent. Why? He asked finally. Why would you care? This benefits you in no way. Eleanor thought about her father, about sacrifice and art and the dreams we abandoned to survive. She thought about her mother, dead 15 years now, whose last words had been about choosing love even when it was difficult. She thought about the girl she'd been and the woman she was becoming in this strange new life. Because I spent the last year watching my father break himself, trying to save something beautiful in a world that only values profit, she said. And I married you believing you were exactly what the world said you were, a man without a heart. But now I know different. And maybe that makes me a fool, but I'd rather be a fool who believes in hidden goodness than someone who accepts easy cynicism. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof like a decision being made by forces beyond their control. Declan looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, not softening exactly, but opening a crack in the ice. They're having breakfast with their aunt right now, he said quietly. In the cottage behind the main house. If you wanted to meet them, briefly, casually, as a friend, she might allow it. Eleanor's heart kicked. Are you sure? No. Declan stood, gathering his papers. But you're right. Everything has already changed. The cottage sat beneath a canopy of live oak so thick the rain barely penetrated, creating a green twilight even in mid-morning. Eleanor followed Declan down a shell path that crunched softly under their feet, her heart beating faster with each step. She'd rehearsed a dozen different introductions in her mind, but they all felt inadequate. How do you meet children whose existence rewrites everything you thought you knew? The woman who answered Declan's knock was the same one Eleanor had seen the night before, tall and composed, with intelligent eyes that assessed Eleanor in a single glance. Dec, she said, her accent carrying the music of the bayou. Didn't expect you this early. Camille, this is Eleanor. Declan's voice was careful, measured. My wife. The words hung in the humid air like something physical. Camille's eyebrows rose fractionally, but her expression remained neutral. Your wife. She looked between them. Does she know? Everything, Eleanor said before Declan could answer. And I'm not here to complicate things. I wanted to meet them, if that's okay. Camille studied her for a long moment, then stepped back from the door. They're finishing pancakes. Fair warning, Sophie asks approximately 700 questions before lunch, and James will want to show you his entire rock collection. The cottage interior was warm and lived in, filled with children's drawings and books and the lingering smell of maple syrup. Through an archway, Eleanor could see a sunny kitchen where two small figures sat at a round table, their dark heads bent over plates. Daddy! Sophie spotted Declan first and launched herself from her chair with the fearlessness of a child who'd never known rejection. She was small for 6, with her mother's features and Declan's gray-blue eyes. You came back early! Declan caught her easily, lifting her up. I told you I would. He kissed her forehead, and Eleanor watched the tenderness in the gesture, so different from the man who'd barely spoken to her on their wedding day. James approached more slowly, 8 years old and already showing signs of his father's careful reserve. But when Declan held out his free arm, the boy stepped into it with quiet relief, and Eleanor saw how desperately these children needed this man who visited in secret. "Sophie, James," Camille said gently, "this is Miss Eleanor. She's a friend of your father's." Eleanor knelt to their level, suddenly understanding why Declan had hidden them so carefully. They were beautiful and whole and achingly vulnerable, and the world would devour them with questions and speculation if it knew who they were. "Hi," she said softly. "Your Aunt Camille warned me about the rock collection. I hope it's as impressive as she claims." James's eyes lit up. "Do you like minerals? Because I have a geode that's purple inside, and Daddy says it's called amethyst, and it came all the way from Arkansas." "I love minerals," Eleanor lied, and then realized it wasn't entirely a lie anymore because she loved how excited he was, how his reserved expression transformed when he talked about something that mattered to him. Sophie was less interested in rocks. She tilted her head, studying Eleanor with disconcerting intensity. "Are you pretty?" she asked with the blunt honesty of childhood. "Sophie," Camille warned. "It's okay," Eleanor smiled. "I don't know. Do you think I am? Maybe." Sophie touched Eleanor's hair, which had come loose from its clip in the humid air. "You have nice hair, but you look sad. Why are you sad?" The question hit Eleanor like a physical blow, not cruel, just observant. Out of the mouths of children came truths adults spent lifetimes avoiding. "Sometimes people are sad even when they're trying to be happy," Eleanor said carefully. "But meeting you is making me less sad." Sophie seemed to accept this. "Daddy's sad too sometimes, but he doesn't cry. Boys don't cry, right, Daddy?" "Everyone cries, sweetheart." Declan set her down gently. "We just cry in different ways." They stayed for an hour. James showed Eleanor his rock collection with the solemnity of a museum curator. Sophie insisted on demonstrating her cartwheels in the cottage's small yard, where the rain had softened to mist. Camille made coffee and watched with the protective wariness of someone who'd seen too many people disappoint the children in her care. And Declan was transformed. He answered every question with patience. He admired every cartwheel. He promised to bring James a book about volcanoes the next time he visited. He was present in a way Eleanor had never seen him be, as if these children called forth a version of himself he couldn't access anywhere else. When it was time to leave, Sophie hugged Eleanor with surprising fierceness. "Will you come back?" she whispered. "Daddy never brings friends." Eleanor looked at Declan over the child's head, searching his face for permission. He gave the slightest nod. "If your daddy says it's okay," Eleanor said, "then yes, I'll come back." Walking back to the main house through gardens heavy with moisture and Spanish moss, neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Declan said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For being kind to them, for not—" He stopped, searching for words. "For not treating them like secrets to be leveraged." Eleanor stopped walking. "Is that what you thought I'd do?" "I didn't know what you'd do. I still don't." Declan turned to face her, and for the first time she saw uncertainty in his expression. Most people, when they discover something like this, they see opportunity, scandal, currency. "I'm not most people," Eleanor said quietly, "and those children deserve better than to be anyone's currency." Something shifted in Declan's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. "My meeting is in 2 hours, but tonight, if you want, we could have dinner. Actual dinner, as people, not contracts." It was the first real invitation he'd offered since their wedding. Eleanor felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "I'd like that." The restaurant Declan chose was tucked away in the Marigny neighborhood, the kind of place locals protected from tourist guides. Small, intimate, with exposed brick walls and candlelight that made everything feel like a secret being shared. They sat at a corner table while rain drummed on the windows and a jazz trio played something slow and blue in the background. "Tell me something true," Declan said after they'd ordered. He'd removed his tie, unbuttoned his collar, small concessions to the Louisiana heat that made him look more human. "Something you've never told anyone else." Eleanor turned her wine glass, watching light refract through red liquid. "I used to paint," she said finally. "Before my mother died, before my father's business started failing. I was going to be an artist, not a great one, probably, but a sincere one. I was accepted to a residency in Vermont, full scholarship. My mother was so proud. What happened?" "She died 3 weeks before I was supposed to leave. Brain aneurysm. She was making breakfast, and then she just wasn't." Eleanor's voice caught. "My father fell apart. Someone had to hold things together, so I stayed. Got a job doing graphic design for a marketing firm. Put my paints in a closet where I wouldn't have to look at them." "Do you regret it?" Declan asked. "Every single day." Eleanor met his gaze. "But I'd do it again. Because some sacrifices aren't about what we gain. They're about what we prevent from being lost. My father needed someone to believe the world could still be good after losing the woman he loved. I couldn't give him my mother back, but I could give him a reason to keep going." Declan was quiet for a long moment. "I understand that," he said finally. "That kind of sacrifice. Your children. Everything I do is for them. Every decision, every business move, every public appearance I avoid." He leaned back in his chair, shadows playing across his face. "People think I'm reclusive because I'm arrogant or eccentric. But the truth is simpler. Every moment I'm in the spotlight is a moment someone might dig deeper, might find Sophie and James, might turn them into headlines instead of children. You can't protect them forever," Eleanor said gently. "Eventually they'll grow up. They'll want to know why their last name is different from yours, why their father only visits in secret." "I know." The admission seemed to cost him something. "But until then, I can give them this, a childhood without cameras, without strangers dissecting their mother's choices, without the weight of a family name that comes with expectations and assumptions." Their food arrived, gumbo rich with okra and andouille, cornbread that crumbled like sweet earth, shrimp that tasted of the Gulf. They ate slowly, the conversation drifting from heavy truths to lighter moments. Declan's unexpected admission that he'd wanted to be a marine biologist as a child. Eleanor's confession that she was terrified of elevators despite living in New York for a decade. "Why did you agree to marry me?" Declan asked eventually. "Your father's debts were significant, but not insurmountable. You could have found other solutions." Eleanor considered lying, offering the simple answer about family and duty. But they'd moved past simple answers. "Because I was tired," she said honestly. "Tired of pretending I was okay. Tired of watching my father break. Tired of living a life that felt like waiting for permission to begin. And your offer, it was so clean, so transactional. 2 years of pretending, and then I'd be free with enough money to start over. It felt like a gift in a strange way." "And now?" Declan's voice was quiet. "Does it still feel like a gift?" Eleanor thought about Sophie's fierce hug, about James's careful smile, about the man across from her who was nothing like the cold billionaire she'd agreed to marry. "Now it feels like something else," she said, "something more complicated." "Complicated can be dangerous," Declan warned. "I know." Eleanor reached across the table, surprising herself, and touched his hand briefly. "But so can isolation. You've been alone so long, Declan, protecting them, providing for them. But what about you? Who protects you from the cost of all that sacrifice? Declan looked at her hand on his, then back at her face, and Eleanor saw something crack in his carefully maintained defenses, not breaking, exactly, but allowing light through the fissures. "I don't know how to be anything else," he admitted. "I've been the provider, the protector, the man behind the wall for so long, I'm not sure there's anything else left." "There is," Eleanor said with certainty. "I saw it in that garden. I saw it with your children. You haven't forgotten how to feel, Declan. You've just forgotten how to feel for yourself." The rain intensified outside, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon and old magic. They stayed at the restaurant until closing, talking about things that mattered and things that didn't, building something fragile and tentative between them. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it, like the first green shoots after winter. When they finally returned to the hotel, soaked from the short walk from the car, Declan stopped outside Eleanor's door. "Thank you," he said, "for today, for understanding, for being you." Eleanor smiled. "We have 2 years, Declan. Maybe we should stop treating them like a prison sentence and start treating them like a chance." "A chance for what?" "To figure out who we are when we're not pretending to be someone else." She went inside before he could respond, her heart racing with something that felt dangerously like hope. The storm that had threatened all day finally broke that night with the full fury of Louisiana summer. Thunder that shook the old house's foundations, lightning that turned the world briefly white, rain so heavy it sounded like the sky itself was weeping. Eleanor woke at 3 a.m. to find her room illuminated by strobing flashes, the balcony doors rattling in wind that smelled of ozone and river water. She was pulling on a robe when she heard it, a knock at her door, soft but urgent. Declan stood in the hallway in pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair disheveled, his expression haunted. "I can't sleep," he said simply, "and I didn't want to be alone." Eleanor stepped back, letting him in. They sat on the floor of her room with their backs against the bed, watching lightning paint shadows across walls, neither of them speaking for a long time. There was something about the storm that made the darkness between them feel less heavy, as if nature's violence gave them permission to be vulnerable. "Tell me about their mother," Eleanor said finally. "Not the facts, the truth." Declan was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Her name was Simone. She was the first person in years who looked at me and saw past the money, past the reputation. She was brilliant, had 3 degrees, spoke 5 languages, could negotiate a contract in the morning and quote Rumi in the afternoon." His voice was rough with memory, and I was too much of a coward to love her properly. "You were scared," Eleanor said. "I was broken." Declan pulled his knees up, wrapping his arms around them like a man trying to hold himself together. "My first marriage ended because I couldn't be the person my wife needed. I worked constantly, provided everything except presence. She left, and I told myself it was for the best, that I wasn't capable of the kind of emotional availability relationships require. Then Simone came into my life like a hurricane, and for a few months I let myself believe I could be different. But you couldn't. I didn't know how, so I ended it before I could hurt her worse." And then she was pregnant, and I realized I'd hurt her anyway, just in a different way. His voice cracked. "She was so angry when she told me. Not about the babies, but about my cowardice. She said she didn't want her children raised by a father who was there out of obligation. She wanted them to know love was a choice, not a duty." Thunder rolled across the sky like a sentence being pronounced. Eleanor watched Declan's profile in the intermittent lightning, the strong lines of his face, the tension in his jaw, the grief he'd been carrying alone for so long. "So she moved here," Eleanor said softly, "and you let her go. Worst decision of my life, but also, maybe the right one?" Declan ran his hands through his hair. "Because she built something beautiful here. She raised Sophie and James in a community that loved them. Her sister moved in to help. They had birthday parties and school plays and ordinary magic, everything I couldn't have given them in New York, shadowed by scandal and speculation. And then she got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time they caught it. She called me and I came immediately. Stayed for 3 months while she—" He stopped, breathing carefully. "While she tried to prepare 8-year-old children and a 6-year-old baby for a world without their mother. And in those last weeks, something changed." She forgave me. Or maybe she'd forgiven me long before, and I was just finally ready to hear it. Eleanor felt tears on her cheeks, for this woman she'd never met, for these children who'd lost so much, for the man beside her who'd been punishing himself with isolation ever since. "She made me promise," Declan continued, "that I'd protect them, that I'd stay hidden, that I'd give them the ordinary childhood she'd fought for, but also that I'd find a way to live. To stop using their protection as an excuse for my own isolation." She said, "Being their father shouldn't mean being nobody to yourself." "And have you?" Eleanor asked. "Found a way to live?" "I thought I had." Declan turned to look at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I told myself that providing for them, visiting when I could, maintaining the walls, that was enough. That was living." "But then you showed up in that courtroom, in a gray dress, looking like you were going to your own funeral, and something in me recognized something in you." Eleanor's breath caught. "What?" "Someone else who'd stopped living. Someone else who'd chosen duty over desire, sacrifice over self. Someone else who was just surviving." Declan reached out hesitantly and touched her face, his thumb brushing away tears. "And I thought, maybe we deserve each other. 2 people going through the motions. 2 contracts pretending to be human." "We're not contracts," Eleanor whispered. "No," Declan agreed. "We're not." The storm was passing now, the thunder moving east, the rain softening to a gentler rhythm. In its wake came a profound quiet, broken only by the drip of water from eaves and the distant sound of the bayou settling back into its ancient patterns. Declan stood, offered his hand. "Come with me." They walked through the sleeping hotel, down stairs that creaked with age and memory, out onto the back porch where the post-storm air smelled clean and new. The sky was clearing, stars emerging between ragged clouds, the moon hanging low and full over wetlands that stretched toward the horizon. "Simone used to say that storms were the earth remembering how to feel," Declan said, "that all that violence was just the world's way of releasing what it had been holding inside." Eleanor stood beside him, their shoulders almost touching. Maybe she was right. Maybe she was. Declan turned to face her fully. "Eleanor, I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's real or just 2 lonely people finding comfort. But I know that for the first time in years, I don't want to be alone. And I think, if you're willing, we might be able to help each other remember how to live instead of just survive." Eleanor thought about her paintings, gathering dust in a Brooklyn closet. She thought about her father's dreams of beauty in a practical world. She thought about the girl she'd been and the woman she wanted to become. "I'm willing," she said. "But Declan, no more secrets. No more walls. If we're doing this, We do it honestly. Honestly, Declan agreed. He took her hand, threading their fingers together with a gentleness that contradicted every rumor she'd ever heard about him. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. They stood together on that porch as dawn began to color the eastern sky, two people who'd married for all the wrong reasons, discovering they might have stumbled into something right. And Eleanor felt, for the first time since her mother's death, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The morning after the storm brought a clarity that felt almost painful, the kind of light that reveals every detail, every truth you've been avoiding. Eleanor woke to find a note slipped under her door in Declan's precise handwriting. "The children are expecting us for lunch. If you're ready," she was ready. They walked to the cottage together through gardens transformed by rain, everything greener and more alive, as if the storm had given the world permission to be itself without apology. Declan was different this morning, still guarded, but with the guard lowered just enough that Eleanor could see the man beneath the armor. "They're going to ask questions," he warned as they approached the cottage. "Sophie especially. She's intuitive in ways that terrify me." "Let them ask," Eleanor said. "We'll answer honestly, age-appropriately, but honestly." Camille met them at the door with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and concern. "They haven't stopped talking about you since yesterday," she told Eleanor. "Fair warning. You've been promoted to Daddy's special friend who knows about rocks." Inside, the cottage smelled of red beans and rice, of cornbread baking, of the kind of home-cooked comfort that money couldn't buy. James was at the kitchen table drawing what appeared to be a detailed diagram of the solar system. Sophie was helping Camille set plates, her small hands careful with the responsibility. "Eleanor!" Sophie abandoned the plates and ran over. "Did you see the storm? It was so loud. I wasn't scared, though. Well, maybe a little scared." But Aunt Camille said storms are just the sky having feelings. "The sky having very loud feelings," Eleanor agreed, kneeling to Sophie's level. "But yes, I saw it. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once." "Like lots of important things," James added, without looking up from his drawing. At 8, he was already developing his father's gift for observation that cut straight to truth. They ate lunch around the small table. 5 people who'd been strangers a week ago and were now something else. Not quite a family, but the possibility of one. Declan helped James label planets, while Eleanor learned from Sophie the intricate rules of a card game that seemed to change every 3 minutes. Camille watched it all with the measured assessment of someone who'd learned to protect her heart carefully. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie said to Eleanor during dessert, bread pudding with whiskey sauce that Camille insisted was mostly cooked off. "Are you going to stay? Or are you like the other people who visit and then leave?" The question hung in the air. Declan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Camille tensed. James kept eating, but Eleanor saw his shoulders tighten with the kind of anticipatory disappointment children learn too young. Eleanor looked at Declan, saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the question he wasn't brave enough to ask. Then she looked back at Sophie. "I don't know what's going to happen," she said honestly. "But I can promise you this. I won't disappear. Even if things change, even if life gets complicated, I'll be someone you can count on. Does that make sense?" Sophie considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher. "Like how Aunt Camille says, our mama is still with us even though we can't see her?" "Exactly like that," Eleanor said, feeling her throat tighten. "Some people stay in our lives even when they're not standing right next to us." Sophie seemed satisfied with this answer. James finally looked up from his plate. "That's good," he said quietly, "because Daddy smiles more when you're here." The simplicity of it, the pure, unfiltered observation, made Eleanor's heart ache. Because it was true. She'd seen it. Declan carried his grief and responsibility like a second skin, but in these moments with his children, with her, something loosened in him. Something remembered how to breathe. After lunch, while the children played in the yard under Camille's watchful eye, Declan pulled Eleanor aside. They stood by the window watching Sophie teach James a complicated game that involved pine cones and incomprehensible rules. "I need to tell you something," Declan said. "My business here, it's not what I told you." Eleanor turned to face him, her stomach dropping. "What do you mean?" "There's no property acquisition, no deal to finalize." He met her gaze steadily. "I come here every month, stay for a few days, work remotely. I told you it was business because that's what I tell everyone. But the truth is, this is the only place I can be myself, the only place where I'm just a father instead of Declan Thorne, the billionaire everyone wants something from." Why lie to me? Because I didn't know if I could trust you yet. Because every instinct I've developed over the past 7 years told me to keep the walls up. Declan ran his hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. "But you were right last night. No more secrets, no more walls. So here's the truth. I come here because this is where my children are, and being their father is the only thing in my life that feels real." Eleanor processed this, fitting it into the larger picture of who Declan was. "How long can you stay this time?" "As long as I want. My assistant thinks I'm on a 2-week research trip. My board thinks I'm scouting international investments. No one questions when Declan Thorne disappears. They just assume I'm being eccentric." He paused. "I usually stay 5 days, but I could stay longer, if you wanted to." "I want to," Eleanor said simply. They stayed for 2 weeks. The days developed a rhythm that felt both foreign and natural. Mornings with the children, afternoons working from the cottage while Sophie drew pictures and James read books about geology. Evenings when Declan and Eleanor would drive into New Orleans for dinner or walk along the levee watching barges move down the Mississippi like slow prayers to the Gulf. Eleanor started painting again. It happened accidentally. James asked if she could draw a dinosaur, and she'd found herself sketching with a confidence she'd forgotten she possessed. Then Sophie wanted a unicorn. Then Camille mentioned there was an art supply store in the quarter. And suddenly, Eleanor was setting up an easel on the cottage's back porch, painting the bayou at sunset, while Declan worked at the kitchen table and the children played nearby. "You're good," Camille said one afternoon, watching Eleanor capture the way light moved through Spanish moss. "Really good. Why'd you stop?" "Life got in the way," Eleanor said, then corrected herself. "No, that's not fair to life. I let fear get in the way. Fear that I wasn't good enough. Fear that choosing art meant being selfish. Fear that if I tried and failed, I'd lose the one thing that made me feel like myself." And now? Eleanor mixed colors on her palette, the particular green of bayou water, the gold of late afternoon sun. "Now I'm married to a man who hides his whole heart to protect his children. I think I can be brave enough to paint." Camille laughed, but it was warm. "He's different around you, you know. Deck, less haunted." "He's different around them." Eleanor nodded toward where Declan was helping Sophie build an elaborate fort out of couch cushions. "I'm just learning to see it." "Maybe," Camille said, "or maybe you make him feel safe enough to be that person even when they're not in the room." That night, Unable to sleep, Eleanor found Declan on the hotel balcony, watching heat lightning pulse in distant clouds. She brought 2 glasses of bourbon and sat beside him without speaking, letting the night settle around them like a question waiting to be asked. "What happens when we go back?" Declan said finally. "To New York, to reality." Eleanor sipped her bourbon, feeling it burn warm and honest. "I don't know. What do you want to happen?" "I want—" He stopped, choosing words carefully. "I want this, what we have here. But I don't know how to have it there. In New York, I'm the Declan Thorne everyone expects, controlled, distant, untouchable. How do I be that person and this person at the same time?" "Maybe you don't," Eleanor said. "Maybe you stop being what everyone expects and start being what you actually are, which is a father, a man who feels deeply, someone capable of love even though he spent years pretending otherwise." She turned to face him. "Declan, you can't protect your children forever by hiding. Eventually they'll grow up and want to know their father fully. Not the secret version, the real one." "I'm afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of what the exposure will do to them. Afraid of the judgment, the speculation, the way people will pick apart their mother's choices and mine. Afraid that everything I've built to keep them safe will crumble." "It might," Eleanor said honestly. "But you know what's worse than that fear? Teaching your children that love is something to hide, that connection requires secrecy, that the price of being themselves is isolation." Declan was quiet for a long moment. Simone said something similar. Near the end, she said she regretted making me promise to stay hidden. That she'd been so angry when she was pregnant, so hurt, that she'd built walls when she should have built bridges. She said— His voice caught. "She said the greatest gift I could give our children was showing them that imperfect love is still love. That trying and failing is braver than never trying at all." She was right. I know. Declan took Eleanor's hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "But knowing and doing are different things. I've been alone so long, Eleanor. Even before Simone, even in my first marriage. I've always been the person on the outside, looking in at what connection might feel like. And now you're here, and my children love you, and I—" He stopped, fear and hope warring in his expression. "You what?" Eleanor prompted gently. "I'm falling in love with you," Declan said, the words quiet but certain. "Not because of our arrangement, not because you're convenient, but because you saw past every wall I've built and chose to stay anyway. Because you paint sunsets with my daughter's crayons and listen to my son explain rocks for 45 minutes without getting bored. Because you're brave in ways I'm still learning to be." Eleanor felt her heart expand with something huge and terrifying and absolutely right. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "With all of you, the part that's a billionaire, and the part that's a father, and the part that's just a man who's forgotten how to let himself be happy." Declan kissed her then, soft and careful, like someone handling something precious and fragile. And Eleanor kissed him back, tasting bourbon and hope, and the beginning of something neither of them had planned for, but both desperately needed. "So what do we do?" she asked when they finally pulled apart. "How do we make this real?" "We start by being honest," Declan said. "With the world, with my children, with ourselves. It'll be messy and complicated and probably painful. But maybe that's the point. Maybe real love is supposed to be complicated." "Maybe it is," Eleanor agreed. They sat together on that balcony until dawn painted the bayou gold, planning a future that scared them both, holding hands like teenagers who'd just discovered the world was bigger and stranger and more beautiful than they'd imagined. 3 months later, Eleanor stood in the living room of Declan's Tribeca penthouse. Their penthouse now, though she was still getting used to the possessive. Watching Sophie and James explore their new bedrooms with the cautious excitement of children who'd been promised good things before and learned to guard their hearts. The decision to bring them to New York hadn't been easy. There had been lawyers and family court judges and Camille's initial resistance and 1,000 small logistical nightmares. But Declan had been right when he'd said hiding wasn't protection. It was just another form of prison. "It's big," James said, standing in the middle of his new room with its view of the Hudson River and the New Jersey shore beyond. "Really big." "Too big?" Eleanor asked. "No." He turned to look at her with those serious eyes that reminded her so much of his father. "Just different. But different can be good, right?" "Different can be very good," Eleanor confirmed. Sophie had no such reservations. She'd claimed the room with the best light and was already planning where her art supplies would go, where her rock collection would be displayed, where the reading nook should be built. She'd inherited her father's strategic mind along with his eyes. "Will we have to keep it secret?" James asked suddenly. "That Daddy's our daddy?" It was the question Eleanor had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. She sat on the edge of his bed, which still smelled like new sheets and possibility. "No more secrets," she said. "Your dad is going to tell people. The company he works with, his friends, eventually probably the newspapers. It might be hard sometimes. People might ask questions or say things that hurt. But you'll never have to pretend he's not your father. Never again." James processed this with the same careful consideration he gave to every new piece of information. "Because you told him hiding was worse than being honest?" "Because your dad figured that out himself," Eleanor corrected. "I just helped him remember he was brave enough to do it." That evening, after the children were asleep in their new rooms, with Camille keeping watch in the guest suite, Declan and Eleanor sat on their own balcony overlooking the city. Tomorrow, Declan would hold a press conference. He would introduce Sophie and James to the world. He would explain, briefly and without apology, that he was a father who'd prioritized his children's privacy and was now ready to prioritize their integration into his full life. The PR team had prepared statements. The lawyers had prepared for every possible complication. But Eleanor knew that no amount of preparation would make this easy. "I'm terrified," Declan admitted, his hand tight around hers. "I know. What if this ruins them? What if the exposure, the attention, the judgment? What if it breaks something in them I can't fix?" Eleanor turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "Then we'll help them heal, together. Because that's what love is, Declan. It's not protecting people from every possible hurt. It's walking with them through the hurt when it comes." "When did you get so wise?" He smiled, but it was shaky. "I married a man who taught me that courage looks like showing up even when you're scared." Eleanor kissed him softly. "We're going to be okay. All of us, because we're not hiding anymore. We're choosing each other, messily, imperfectly, honestly." The press conference the next day was controlled chaos. Declan stood at a podium in a conference room downtown, Eleanor beside him, and told the truth with the same precision he brought to business deals. He spoke about Simone with respect and sorrow. He spoke about his children with fierce love. He spoke about his marriage to Eleanor with an honesty that made several reporters blink in surprise. "I've spent 7 years believing that protection meant distance," Declan said, "that the best thing I could do for my children was keep them separate from my public life. But I was wrong. The best thing I can do is show them that love, imperfect, complicated, real love, is worth the risk of being seen." The questions came fast and sometimes cruel. But Declan answered them with a steadiness Eleanor recognized from their nights in Louisiana when he'd finally learned to stop performing and start being. Sophie and James watched from a private room upstairs, Camille with them, and when Declan was finished, he went straight to them. Eleanor watched through the doorway as he knelt and asked if they were okay, if they understood what had just happened, if they needed anything. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," Sophie said, hugging him tight. "You were brave." "Yeah," James agreed. "Really brave." 6 months later, Eleanor had her first gallery showing. Small, intimate, just 15 paintings of Louisiana bayous and New York rooftops, and children's faces illuminated by fireflies. Declan had wanted to buy the entire collection, but Eleanor had laughed and told him that wasn't how art worked. "Besides," she'd said, "some of them need to go out into the world, to find people who need them." Sophie and James had dressed up for the opening, James in a tiny suit that made him look alarmingly grown up, Sophie in a dress she'd chosen herself that was exactly the color of amethyst. They walked through the gallery, holding Declan's hands, studying each painting with the seriousness of professional critics. "This one's my favorite," Sophie announced, stopping in front of a canvas that showed the cottage in Louisiana at sunset, 2 small figures visible in the garden. "Because that's us. That's our family." "It is," Eleanor agreed, her throat tight with emotion. "Are you going to paint more?" James asked. "Many more," Eleanor promised, "for as long as I have something to say." "Good," he said simply, "because you're really good at it." That night, after the gallery had closed and the children were asleep, and Camille had gone to her own apartment in Brooklyn, because she'd decided that New York wasn't so bad after all, especially with a niece and nephew who needed their aunt nearby, Declan and Eleanor stood on their balcony, looking out at the city that had once felt like a prison and now felt like possibility. "Thank you," Declan said quietly. "For what?" "For forcing me to marry you," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "For being brave when I wasn't. For seeing my children and choosing to love them. For reminding me that hiding isn't the same as protecting." Eleanor leaned into him, feeling the solid reality of his presence, the truth of what they'd built together. "Thank you for being complicated," she said, "for having secrets worth uncovering, for loving so deeply you tried to hide it. For giving me a reason to paint again." They stood together as the city hummed below them, 2 people who'd married for all the wrong reasons and discovered that sometimes wrong reasons lead to right destinations. The contract that had brought them together had expired months ago, but neither had mentioned it, because what they had now wasn't contractual. It was earned, built from honesty and courage and the daily choice to keep showing up even when it was hard. Inside, Sophie stirred in her sleep, and James called out from a dream. Eleanor and Declan moved together, automatically, the way parents do, checking on their children, adjusting blankets, whispering reassurances. And in those small gestures, Eleanor saw everything that mattered. The family they'd become, not despite their complicated beginning, but because of it. She thought about the girl she'd been, scared and sacrificing herself, choosing duty over dreams, and the woman she'd become. She thought about Declan, learning to be vulnerable instead of invincible. She thought about 2 children who'd lost their mother, but gained a family willing to fight for them. "This is what happiness looks like," Eleanor whispered to Declan as they stood in the doorway of Sophie's room, watching her sleep. "Imperfect and complicated and absolutely real." "It is," Declan agreed, pulling her close. "It absolutely is." And somewhere in the Louisiana bayou, where Spanish moss hung like prayers and storms remembered the world, Eleanor imagined Simone watching over them all, these imperfect, brave, beautifully human people who'd learned that love wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, being honest, choosing each other again and again, even when it was terrifying. Especially when it was terrifying. Because that, Eleanor had learned, was where all the best stories began. Thank you for watching this story of love, courage, and second chances. If this touched your heart, please subscribe for more cinematic tales that celebrate the beauty of imperfect humanity.